One of the myths that you bust, for example, is that places that say we support women, look at our maternity leave policy. Tell me how that is so incomplete.
It's incomplete because the world of work for women can't change without men. This job requires so much travel. Who's going to take care of your kids? And I was just like so stunned by this response. Who gave you permission to slow down my career? If you're asking these questions of Mita, would you ask these questions of Tom? I go to work. Does anyone even know I'm here? Does anyone even care? Do I get credit for anything? I really admire sports teams. When I think about coaching, it's like, you don't kick me when I'm down, you help me up. When I make mistakes that are stupid, you don't need to tell me they're stupid. You're going to teach me and coach me through them.
All right, Mita, thanks for taking time on what is about to become a barnstorm of a book tour. I know you're on a podcast tour right now, so thanks for taking some time out to
Thanks
hop
for
on the show.
having me. Yeah.
It's my pleasure. I mean, your story is incredible, and both books are remarkable, and I'm glad I got to read the second one. I now need to read the first one. But
you need to rewind.
I want to start with first, what did it feel like for you at some point in life, if you can recall, to ever not be included or be seen growing up? Or maybe it's something culturally, right, that you had to battle.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that, and let's start there.
Well, I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. As you know, I was born and raised here in the U.S. with my younger brother outside of Boston. And I just always remember being the funny-looking, dark-skinned girl with the long, funny-looking braid whose parents spoke funny English until it wasn't funny anymore. And I was bullied a lot, both verbally and physically, by my peers growing up. I did not grow up in an Instagram era, so I didn't see myself reflected in products and services. Actually, always was curious, like, who holds the power of the pen, whose stories get told, who gets to be on a cereal box, who gets to be on a billboard. I speak with my Black girlfriends now and they'll say, you were reading Essence growing up? And I was like, yeah, I don't identify as Black, but certainly identify with the Black community in many ways in terms of not having access to role models early on in my career. Probably one of the most pivotal things that happened to me. I mean, there's many, but when I was growing up, I was called smart fart, which probably is that, I guess, a compliment. I don't know. I had, spitballs thrown at me, lunch thrown at me, trash thrown at me. I had the S word and the N word, which I did not know racial slurs. They were spray painted on our driveway. We didn't have the money growing up to actually, repave the driveway. We just let the snow in New England weather wash it away. And I was a freshman in high school. When I was taking Intro to Physical Sciences class, I thought I was going to be a doctor, which is probably a sidebar for another time. Didn't end up liking the sight of blood, so that didn't work out. But I loved that class. And I was in it, and I remember there were two boys, for whatever reason, who decided to target me. And they would take my braid in the hallway and go, nay, like I was a horse. And one of them sat behind me, and I still remember he would hold my head down really hard if I didn't pass papers back fast enough. And this escalated one day into they decided to set my hair on fire in the lab portion of the class. And so I'm standing there with my lab partner who has not spoken to me in like the 8 weeks that we're in class together. And she says to me, I think your hair is on fire, because anyone who knows that smell of burning hair, that smell distinctly. And they were two benches behind me lighting matches and throwing them into my braid. And so what happens after that is, obviously this is stopped. We're all sent to the principal's office. I'm made to feel like I also did something wrong. They are suspended for a day and come back to class and terrorize me off and on for the rest of the year. But something really interesting happens in that moment, which is that the guidance counselor, I'll never forget, of the school was also the varsity track coach and the cross country coach. And I am not, as my husband will attest, I'm not athletically inclined, but I can run fast. And he sort of spotted that in me, and he forced me. I was not interested at all, forced me to join the varsity track team and cross country team. And all of a sudden, sports became this equalizer. Like, all of these girls saw me as an equal. They respected. I wasn't the fastest, but I wasn't the slowest. And they respected my skill. And, as I reflect on what that means for the workplace, it's that he was an ally. Like, he really showed up and intervened in a time that mattered. But, in the years that I sort of reflect on this, you can Google bullies at night, like you Google exes, but you sort of wonder, like, where were the parents? Where were law enforcement? Where were the teachers? Like, where was the community? And so I think when I think about pivotal moments early on, that's really driven me. Like, I don't want anyone to feel that way. And certainly as we're raising children, and I know you are, it's like heartbreaking to think that would happen to your kids.
No, it's heartbreaking to listen to. I mean, I feel like every Indian that grew up in a place that wasn't a melting pot at the time can relate to that on some level, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
And yours, that story, you know, tugs at my heart, and I can see this, you know, young girl going through this. What was it that kept you going during times like that, of feeling torment day after day and going to school and, you know, not feeling accepted and not being
Yeah.
included in things and just always constantly feeling like this outsider? What kept you going?
I had a very strong family. It was just my parents and brother and I. My dad was from a family of 10. My dad, rest in peace. My mom from a family of 9. No one immigrated to this country except for them. And it was just me and my brother and my parents. But at home, I felt safe. You know, it's probably why I love reading and writing. I was painfully shy and introverted. If we believe in introversion, extroversion, I believe that I might have been born more of an extrovert. This is really interesting, but the environment I was raised in forced me to withdraw and be an introvert. And so I loved reading and writing and watching films. I loved watching commercials. And so I think that inspired, as my mother said, like I always wanted to write since I could hold a crayon. But very early on, just like doodling and observing things, because I spent a lot of time alone.
In being alone, I guess that's where, you know, that's where a lot of those lessons, or that's what the manifest was. Now, were there times or a specific instance when, aside from that great story with the track coach, where you kind of like it turned into this, like an inflection point of empowerment, or like your life kind of went in a slightly different direction, right? Were there other moments during your youth or upbringing that were equally as defining of like, you know, here's a step up, or it's not so bad, or, you know, we're actually going to go in a totally different direction now?
I went to a very small high school at the time. It's still around, Massachusetts Academy of Math and Science, which is
Mm-hmm.
ironic because I don't use much math and science today. I do, but
That's very
mostly.
that's very un-Indian of you,
Yes,
by the
very
way. Yeah.
un-Indian of me, right? But again, I was on this pre-med track, which just somehow fell off that track. And so it was a very small class. It was like, it was like 25 people. And I started there my junior year, and it was such a wonderful community. The teachers and students, and, you know, we were all just really interested in learning, and we weren't mocked for that. We really loved learning and sharing and teaching. And that's one of my fondest memories, going there. And math teacher who pushed me, an English teacher who pushed me, people who cared, people who saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself, right? I think a lot of people early on saw my natural instinct for my writing and storytelling. And along the way, I'm really grateful that those people helped me develop that further, or encouraged me to do it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I want to get into debunking inclusion myths, because it's
Yes.
a big tenet of your book, of course, and your purpose in life right now. But before we talk about that, was there either a moment when you decided that championing this was something that was going to be your calling? Because it clearly is. And this is something you're very, very passionate about,
Mm,
publicly, privately.
yeah.
Obviously, you're doing it you know, in a literary sense as well. But what was the spark that caused this?
I don't know if there was one spark, except to say I never expected, and this is naive of me, the bullies from the playground and schoolyard to follow me into conference rooms in corporate America. I somehow didn't realize they'd follow me, and wow, these people grew up and then here they were again. And I thought to myself, I chased like titles and trophies and A plus and extra credit, right? My parents had always said, education was what was the safe haven for me. Like I knew education would be what would bring economic opportunity. That's what many of us are taught. And so when I went into the workplace, I thought that's what it would be. It would just be fair and equitable based on what you deliver. And that's not the case at all. And so I think I entered this world of work where I'm like, there's not many people who look like me at the time entering the marketing field, and also systems that weren't built for me. And I think throughout my career, having these moments like, this doesn't feel right. It's uncomfortable. This isn't fair. And I think it sort of has just been a thread throughout my life and found me again in corporate. And so would probably say with the passing of my dad suddenly in 2017, that was sort of the moment when you lose someone you love really suddenly. You think, okay, you have one life to live. I could die tomorrow, literally. So then what am I waiting for? So probably I would say that was a big turning point when I started to write more consistently, show up on social media more consistently, think, stopped caring what people would think.
There was something you said there about your dad I wanted to just touch on for a second. And with his passing, and I think a lot of times in cultural homes, it's not easy to talk to parents about what we're going through in our day to
Yes.
day, because for them, they experience their own struggle and they're just like, deal with it. Like
Yep.
life is
Yep.
hard, whatever,
Yep.
you've actually got it easier than I
Especially
do.
if
So
they're
I don't,
immigrant parents. Yeah. Especially if
yes.
they're immigrant parents. Yeah.
So they're just like, I don't want to hear it. I don't have time for it. I
Yes.
went through
Yes.
much
Yes.
worse.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
just, these are
Yeah.
like tiny problems, but they're not, because they're the only problems. And again, my heart's broken for this, watching this little girl go through this. And as somebody who, does martial arts and champions anti-bullying campaigns all
Yeah.
the time. And I tell people, if you sit by and watch other people being bullied, then you're no different. You're actually
Yeah.
part of the
Absolutely.
problem. Like, you have a responsibility to step in,
Absolutely.
report it, talk about it, stick up for those that can't necessarily stick up for themselves. Did your parents ever guide you at all in this sense, or was it kind of like the rest of our parents, like they just told you to toughen up and deal with it, or you didn't even
I,
talk that much?
I did. They knew some of the things going on. I think they were also confused because they didn't experience this when they were growing up.
No,
I
why
mean,
would they?
bullying
Yeah,
happens everywhere, but for us, we were one of three families of color in majority white town. So they were very confused. And if I think about it now, I think that they were being bullied in different ways. Of course they were, right?
sure.
We're Bengali, and my mother always had the sindoor, right? And people would say to her, "Your head's bleeding, right? Why are you wearing a bindi?" Like all sorts of things. And, I recall now that I believe my dad was also, being bullied. He didn't talk about it. He was a dark skinned, 5'6" engineer who ended up becoming an executive at a Fortune 100 company. But there were moments that I remember, like I have a vivid memory that, these are things, wow, I wish I could have spoken to him about, but I have vivid memory of my mother and father being in the kitchen, and there's this trash bag, and in the trash bag is a bunch of suits. And what had happened was, my dad was an engineer making what he could, and he also was not somebody who was very fussed with how he looked. He dressed fine, but as a joke, his coworkers had gotten him all these suits from like a secondhand store and given it to him because they didn't feel like he was dressing well enough for work. And I don't know how my dad received that. And these were people who were probably, he thought were friends, but they were bullies at work. And I just remember in hushed tones, I remember being very young. My brother's younger than me, so I wonder if he has this memory. But I remember that there was this trash bag of suits, and he's sharing the story with my mother. And my mother, like, they're making fun of you. And so I can piece together things now where I think he was also being bullied at work, but did not have the same community you have today, did not have a podcast like yours, did not have relationships and friendships where you could openly talk about these things. And generationally, it was just not, you've left everything you have to
Yeah,
sacrifice for your family, like toughen up, take
yeah,
it.
yeah. No, it's pretty consistent, I would say. And I appreciate you sharing that, so thank you, because that's a very honest reveal about your dad. And I would like to think that maybe he wasn't being bullied, that it was sincere, or was it like a joke? But you're right, it was
It
actual
was. And
bullying.
I could tell from other things too, where he thought these people were his friends. And, I've done this. I have mistaken coworkers for being friends because you spend a lot of time together. But there are people who, unfortunately are competitive, jealous, or don't want the best for you, or are
Sure.
bullying you. Like bosses bully you, coworkers can also bully you.
I say a lot, it's a very rare trait to meet people that are genuinely happy for others all the
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
Like, when you find them, I can count on one hand how many people I know like this. I
Yeah.
mean, and they're to be treasured, because it's a very unique trait and a level of comfort, or just yeah, it's comfort within their own skin to be
Yes.
able to exert
Comfortable with
that.
who you are. Yeah.
Yeah, just no matter what's going on. So let's get into debunking the inclusion myths, because this is a big part of what you're doing right now and what your mission is.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about some common traps that even well-meaning leaders will
Sure.
fall into. One of the myths that you bust, for example, is that places that say we support women, look at our maternity leave policy. Tell me how that is like so incomplete.
It's incomplete because the world of work for women can't change without men. So, this idea that just because you're doing maternity leave, you're doing everything you can to support women, it's really parental leave. And that's where the conversation has to change. I know you're a very involved father, and you and your partner have kick ass careers, right? And so, like, why is it that it's a maternity leave? And it's like, oh, we're doing all these things to support women. And also, not all women will become mothers, right? So there's that piece as well. And this idea that you're doing maternity leave, it's check the box. There's so many things that happen going up to leave, when you're coming back from leave. One of the things I still remember is I had just had my daughter. I came back to work. I was up for a pretty big promotion. And you know, in large organizations, when a number of people are coming to you, like, this is your job, go apply for it, number of like allies coming to you. And in a large corporation, your boss can block you, obviously, from moving. And I go to apply for the job and I talk to him about it. And he says to me, Mita, your kids are so young. This job requires so much travel. Who's going to take care of your kids? You need to not take this job. You need to be focused on raising your family. And I was just like so stunned by this response. And I wish I had said, like, who gave you permission to slow down my career? Because that's the thought I have throughout my career, is like, who gave you permission to slow down my career? Because it's not often that we have these conversations with men, right? It's not often that someone is saying to a man who's also a father, hey, have you thought about taking on this assignment and what it means for your family? Right? And if we were doing those things equally, then great, but we're not. And so that's why it's just this idea of maternity leave is just like not even the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. So how can we shift then as a society, as a working culture, as a corporate culture, in many ways? How do we shift from these performative gestures to actually like meaningful change?
Yeah. I mean, listen, policies are important. Policies, structure, guidance, important. But here's the thing. You can have all the great policies in the world, and Mita, as an individual leader, wreaks havoc on the system and shows up with, a lot of it has to do with, be honest, like how you were raised and what you think the role of women is at home and at work, right? And some of these are deep seated, right? I also, can't remember many women in my life who were working outside the home, except when I went to high school, my mother became a teacher. And so I have biases too. But the question I always think about is I ask leaders to think about, if you're asking these questions of Mita, would you ask these questions of Tom, right? So for example, a classic one you'll see many times in talent reviews is, Mita's just come back from parental leave. She's got a young kid at home. We just sort of discussed this, and she's up for a promotion and we want to give her this job. And somebody says, well, Mita just came back from leave. I don't think she's going to want to do this job with a young kid. And the decision is made for her. But if Mita was Tom, would anyone ask about Tom, right? And so that would be the question to say, well, have we asked Mita what she wants in her career? Have we had a discussion with her? Why are we making the assumption that she doesn't want the promotion, right? And I said, always ask, even if it comes from a place of good intention. Some of these things people will say, well, I just am putting your best interest at heart. It's like, well, you didn't ask me and you didn't walk through to think about what the impact would be.
Yeah, I can see how, both sides there, like, I'm just even like putting myself as you're saying this, like if I was in the role of somebody and I said that, it would be out of just general sincere thoughtfulness.
Right,
That,
exactly.
a mom goes through so much more than a dad
Yes,
does. So
yes,
a
yes.
dad's faculties could maybe sometimes be overlooked and just saying, oh, you're fine, get back in there. Like nobody even thinks twice about it.
Yeah,
But to just assume that a woman in that situation, that you can make the decision for her without asking her is equally wrong. Yeah.
yes,
So that
absolutely.
makes a lot of sense. I think, for a lot of us that work and people that listen to this podcast, and me myself, like we have teams, we have groups that we run, right? And some of us are involved or tied to industries that have very few boundaries when it comes to communication and timelines. Like our clients do this to us, they message us. So your book, the devil emails at midnight. Sometimes the devil for me is my client. I'm not the devil. The client is
Yeah,
the devil, right?
yeah.
They're emailing me or texting me at midnight or 11 o'clock expecting things. But like, how do we not necessarily characterize ourselves? Because it was the very first time I read your book title and I thought, man, am I a devil? Like I got a little
Listen, I've
self-conscious.
been the devil. I'm sure you have
Yeah.
been too. We all have been. Yeah, yeah. That's the point of the book, right?
Right. Yeah. Just it's to pay attention to it. Right.
Yeah.
But what actually inspired that particular title, which I think is an incredible title and it can never be forgotten. It's so good. I'm sure your
Oh,
book
thank you.
publisher told you as well.
Yeah.
But what inspired that title? Was it an actual incident at work specifically, or was it just a pattern of hearing these same things of these bosses that somehow
Yeah.
recognize no boundaries?
Yeah, it was one of my first bosses in corporate America. I was so excited to work for her, and the feeling was not mutual, right? I was like
Wow.
delighted that I got to work for her. And I was like the golden retriever following around the office. Like I just wanted time with her, and she never had time for me
Why
except
do
at
you think
midnight.
that was when you look
Uh,
back?
I think she was just too busy being busy. I don't think
Okay.
I was important enough. Let's be clear. I think I was too
Okay.
junior and not important enough. But I was
Okay.
important enough when she decided to dump her inbox between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And we know what that looks like.
Oh, yeah.
FYI, can you pay this invoice? The supplier needs this. We need to get samples to the customer, like all these things. And because I wanted to please her, to make her appreciate me, to be seen, right? I would respond. So it was like, I was also, we've all been in that situation. Someone starts it and then we keep going. We're like back and forth, right?
Yep.
And so that was really what inspired it, because the devil emails at midnight, people have a strong reaction to that. And the point also is if that's the only time you make for your team, then there's a problem. If you're consistently only emailing then, and people will then say to me, well, I don't have time. Like, you know, especially you probably saw this Microsoft study that came out that talks about all these people, 30% or above logging in after 8 o'clock at night. Like people are doing this like second shift. And my counter to that is you make time for things that matter. And I treat it sort of like, my wardrobe. Like, I don't need all this stuff. Why do I have all this stuff? Get rid of it, repurpose it. Same thing with the calendars. Like I've been in companies where it's like that same, who hasn't been in a meeting where you all show up, you're like, what's this meeting about? And no one knows. And it's been on the calendar since June and it just keeps showing up and no one has the courage to cancel it. Have the courage to cancel it. I used to be Gary Vaynerchuk's client, who I'm a big fan of, and he talks about the 15-minute meeting, right? It's sort of wild, but yeah, you can do it. I'm sure you do that. 15-minute meeting, like why not? And back to the point, interesting about clients, I have never been a 911 operator, a firefighter. I've never worked in an emergency room. I've sold a lot of beauty products. I've sold SaaS software. Nothing I have ever done is life or death. I'm not saying there aren't moments that there's going to be emergencies and crises that happens, but retraining people to be like, is this really a midnight, or I'm going to just email you at 7 or 8 a.m. when I get up, and just not responding. I've done that. Like you retrain people, like the person who keeps texting you. This is my boundary. Like I can say you're taking advantage of me, or I just didn't set the boundary.
You get what you tolerate, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think we need to have you champion this for the entire mortgage industry, because we get abused by our referral partners and our clients with that. So I want everyone to know that it's okay, and just either not respond to it, or you train your people better. Like you train your people how to communicate, because again, if you just go into it blindly and just start openly tolerating any and all types of communication pathways and protocols, then that sets the precedent, and everyone just kind of feels you give them a false sense of security that this is okay.
Yeah. And I think what you're also hitting on is when everything is urgent, nothing is urgent. So there are going to be moments where you might have to do a midnight call or something's happening in your industry. Right. And you want those to matter. I can recall years ago, before I got married, living in like a Manhattan building, a big apartment building, right? And the fire alarm goes off. You're like, what's going on? And then somebody in the building is like, oh, it's a false alarm. It's like a malfunction. There's no fire. But you sit there and you're in your apartment or whatever, and you just hear that faint buzzing, right? And and after a while you go numb, you just get used to it. It's the same thing. Like if you keep saying everything's urgent, I'm just going to disengage, because I don't actually know if it's urgent. So you repeatedly, and the client too, it's really interesting. The client who emails you at midnight or at 5 a.m. rarely is the one that you're going to pay attention to, because you're like, they must need something, because they don't usually do this. Whereas if Mita's constantly doing it, you're like, oh God, it's Mita again. And you're all complaining about her behind the scenes. Like, oh, who's going to answer that? Let it go till the morning. I guess I'll respond this time. Right.
Yeah. Like a huge ethos of LFG Energy in this podcast. And I think for all human beings, there's this strong desire to be seen, to be heard, to feel like we're part of something. And this podcast, I feel and what I'm really proud of over the last, we're coming up on our 1 year here.
Oh,
and
congrats.
Thank you. It means a lot. I appreciate it. And everyone's played a very important role, but I feel like everybody who listens can identify with our guests on some level. They feel seen, they feel heard by them. So inclusion is an everyday leadership behavior, right? And I want to ask you, what does real inclusion look like day to day in a team? Because all of us want to create that. I want to continue to foster that kind of culture within this community and within this podcast audience. But what does that look like for a team day to day?
I'll tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like I go to work. Does anyone even know I'm here? Does anyone even care? Do I get credit for anything? Do people value me or support me? I mean, it's the opposite is I work for you. I feel seen. I feel valued. I feel recognized. My voice matters. My contribution matters. you're in coach mode, right?
Yeah.
I really admire sports teams. And like when I think about coaching, it's like, you don't kick me when I'm down, you help me up.
Hmm.
When I make mistakes that are stupid, you don't need to tell me they're stupid. You're going to teach me and coach me through them. It's really interesting when you're raising children, and when we're raised as children, we're taught to say please and thank you often. And somehow we forget that in the workplace, like gratitude, right?
Yeah.
Like, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Please, right? All these things, right, matter. And that is the real retention tool, is people are chasing like meditation apps, and I don't need another oversized hoodie and another blanket or socks or whatever somebody's going to send me. It's like, I really want to make sure that people feel like they know I'm making impact, and
Yeah.
that I'm excited to be here at work every day. Not every day. I mean, some days you might not be, but you're like, wow, like people want to feel like they're doing what they were hired to do, right?
Yeah.
That
Right.
they're
And
able to do that.
to be seen, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledged or appreciated or greeted the same way. Like
Yes.
I go out of my way to do that. And where I learned it, and I'm sure you learned this, maybe it was all from the same pathway. It was through my dad.
Mm.
My dad was vice president of a university. So where we grew up in Reno. And when we would get dropped off at his work sometimes or be there with him or going on weekends, there was this janitor. She was much, much older. She had to have been, I mean, we were kids. She had to have been in her 60s,
Mm.
70s. So she was really old and she moved up, but she was so sweet. She had this bright red hair and just big eyes and was full of life. But she'd always be really, really friendly with my dad. And I didn't understand. I thought maybe because my dad was this like extrovert who was friendly with everyone. I didn't understand why it was that she was so comfortable around him until I got older. Because when I went to school there on campus, I would go visit my dad, being in college. And there was a day that she pulled me aside and said, "Do you know why I love your father so much?" I said, "Why is it?" Her name was Jewel. She said, "Because your father's the only vice president in this building or administrator that actually talks to me like a human being. Everyone else dismisses me as the janitor.
Wow.
Your father says hi to me. He treats me like a human being, which is why I love going into his office and talking to him." I think about it now and it makes me cry because like I almost want to get emotional about it because
Yeah.
that highlights exactly the same need you're talking about when it comes to inclusion and to be seen and treated with dignity, right? And we'll get more out of our teams. Like if we do this with our teams as leaders, bringing this back to business, if we're actually creating something that really truly looks like day-to-day inclusion and treating human beings as such, we'll get more from people. We'll be more to people. Like
Absolutely.
the aggregate of all of this is so powerful. You can't even quantify it. How do
You
you lead in a way, Mita? How are we supposed to be leading in ways that make people feel safe, valued, motivated in a workplace now? Like, what are the frameworks for that you would tell me as a leader and say, look, do you have this in place? Are you doing these things?
Yeah. And I'm sure you're doing much of them as we've gotten to know each other. I mean, role modeling vulnerability is really important.
Yeah.
Things that you're struggling with. No one has that. People will say you're an expert on this and this. I just have deep expertise. There's no such thing as experts anymore. How can you be an expert in anything with the world changing? But I have deep expertise, yes, but I'm not an expert. So there's like vulnerability in saying that you don't have the answers. There's humility in wanting to learn. There's humility in going to your team and saying, this is the problem we're facing. I'm not sure what the solution is. I think it could be this. I think what's shifted in the workplace, which is really important, and I think what people are really stuck in, and I'll be honest, this is like the corporate dream I chased for years. The corner glass office with the city view, and you look out and you see everyone who reports into you, right? And maybe you got a bathroom in your office and a couch and all that stuff. And you're like, but it's this idea of like being in service of each other. That's the flip. And that's the best way that inclusive leaders I see work. But it is this idea that many of us were raised on. It's like the triangle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm at the top and everyone else. And for me now, it's about a circle, right? We're all sitting eye level at the same table. And so that's what it is. And I think the more you can make space to get to know people, it makes the harder business times tough. When I went through losing my father and started to tell people at work, or people would come up to me, it's the club you never want to be part of, right? But everyone is going to be part of it. And it was so, my dad died 10 years ago. My mother's sick. All these people that would come to me and talk to me about it, you instantly had this connection. And so then when an innovation launches or a sale falls through or innovation fails, you can get through it, right? You can get through it because you've gotten through so many things, right? And so I think that's like, I think the key. And I think that's what people really struggle with is how can you be vulnerable And how can you have humility if I am the leader and I'm in charge and I was raised, right? I got to
Hmm.
this position for a reason. And I think that's the biggest thing as I coach people, I see leaders struggle with.
No, and I'm so glad you shared that, because I think I couldn't agree more that that's like the most important tenet, because it's just being real, right? Instead of
Yes.
this illusion of something or this image of
Yeah.
something that
And
isn't
then
truly
everything
there.
else flows from that, as you said.
Totally.
The rest is like you can't even measure productivity,
No,
trust, innovation, all of that. It kinds of happens like magic, but it's not magic. It's the first thing that you have to do is be
yeah,
vulnerable.
being vulnerable, and I mean, you'll never arrive at a place of sincerity if you start from a place of insincerity. And
Absolutely.
if vulnerability is basically what you're talking about in that workplace, is exactly that. What is a small thing, if somebody's listening to this and they're maybe starting to get a little introspective, maybe a little uncomfortable or self-conscious, like, I wonder how I am. And that's good. I want people to think a little bit more, right? Like, how am I showing up in the workplace or with my team or the team I'm part of? Maybe I don't lead the team, but I'm part of the team, right? Again, to your speaking to your circle, we're all equals in many ways
Right.
this way. What's a small thing that someone can do today to make somebody feel seen within their team, or maybe make themselves feel more seen? Like, thinking back to yourself in those young days at school, or in those some of those early jobs that you took, and then
Yeah.
now as a thought leader as well. Like, what's
Yeah.
something that we can do on either side of the equation to make people feel seen or make ourselves feel seen?
I never could understand why I couldn't present my own work
Mm,
in corporate America. Like early on, it just sort of boggled my mind. Like, why couldn't I be in the room to share? Why couldn't I be the one sending the email? And I think that's really important. People come to work to make impact. So I'm not saying you're always going to be in the client meeting, but I'm saying making sure that you as a leader know that I know that you did this and I'm really thankful and I'm really happy and this is the result, or I can't bring you into the meeting, but I made sure I credited you, or this is a 2-hour meeting. I'm just going to ask you to pop in for 5 minutes, say hello, and introduce this part. Those things really matter. They matter a lot. The other thing I would say is watch out for the small talk that can exclude people, right?
mm-hmm.
Particularly if you're entering a Zoom and people are talking about the NFL draft, or they're talking about some golf outing, or they're talking about their kids, or like, it's very interesting, right? Not everyone's a parent, right? And I love my children, but no one's going to love my children as much as I do. No one wants to hear about them all day. And so just thinking about, can you talk about weekend plans? Can you talk about shows that people are binging? How do you, especially I've noticed when right before a meeting's opening, people are gathering either virtually or in person, watch for like what the banter is, because that's immediately when people might feel like they don't have anything to contribute because of the topic that is being discussed.
Okay. And on the topic of contribution, I want to get your advice for the
Sure.
listener here in a few key areas. What advice do you have for someone that maybe doesn't feel seen in their current space?
If they're not feeling seen in their current space, I would ask you to think about what are you doing to contribute to that.
Okay.
So my, dad, rest in peace, would always say, keep your head down, work hard, and you'll be recognized and stay out of trouble, which is funny because I was afraid of my shadow as a kid. But the stay out of trouble is like, don't get involved in office politics.
Okay.
Don't be seen. And if you're not seen, people aren't going to know what you're working on. I will tell you honestly, there were times in my career that I was okay with people presenting my work because I was taught to be humble and stay behind the scene. And so the question is, there's two parts to the equation. Your boss or organization can be holding you back from being more visible, but you could also be holding yourself back and not actually putting yourself out there for a variety of reasons.
Okay. Now, how can somebody lead up or drive inclusion or change, even if they're not, like, quote unquote, the boss?
Gosh, there's so many ways to do that. Watch for people that suddenly become disengaged or quieter than normal in meetings, right? If you
Okay.
had a colleague who was always contributing ideas or always at the happy hours or coming up with new projects, and suddenly I've just stopped engaging, don't do the, I'm a big fan of Larry David, the stop and chat from covering the, if you're going to ask someone how they're doing, give the space, right?
Sure.
And so check in on someone today who has gone quiet, or someone you used to see regularly that you don't anymore. And you're like, what's going on with that person? Like, why don't I see them grabbing coffee in the morning? Or why haven't I seen them at, our company's quarterly town hall? Like, what's going on with them? Those are things that we can do. And listen, I think that if you're working in any organization, money talks, money's power. Think about how you can write checks to small business owners. Right. I've worked in many a corporation where it's like, hey, we're going to write that same $1 million check to that same agency. And it's like, well, why couldn't someone else produce this podcast? Or why couldn't someone else come take this video? Like, do you think about that? Like we all have power in that. Like we all on some level have access to budgets. Even when I was more junior, right? I might have input into it. And it's like, just question that and say, is there a possibility we could see if someone else locally could do that?
Okay.
You know, is there a possibility to, because, you know, what I think that, and small business owners understand this, but there's so much power when a large company or any company can be the person's first customer, right? And for them to be able to say that I'm working with this company and now I can have a testimonial and I can put the logo on the website, it creates a lot of momentum. And so just think about that, whether it's $500 or you have, you know, $50,000 to spend.
Okay. Great advice. And if someone's stuck in survival mode, working as part of a team or an organization, they're just trying to keep up, what's the first probably mindset shift or behavioral shift that you think they should make or can make?
If you're stuck in survival mode, you need to sit with yourself in the uncomfortable silence and sort of start to think about how you can break that pattern. Are you really in survival mode, or have you forced yourself to be in survival mode? Right? We talk about generational trauma. You know, my parents were in survival mode when they came to this country.
Right.
I'm not in survival mode, but I act that way a lot of times, right? Because of the trauma that was passed on. So what ownership can you take of that? And when you're in survival mode and you feel stuck in a workplace, you're like, I'm stuck, right? The most dangerous thing you can do is not make a plan to get unstuck. And what I mean by that is I have become that person who's not performing. I have become that toxic individual because I feel like something's been done, I've been wronged at work, and you start the downward spiral, right? And so before I start that spiral, stop and be like, okay, take that energy and start. I say my get out plan. What's my plan? How am I going to get unstuck? Am I going to get out internally? Meaning, you know, this team isn't working for me. I'm going to try to see if there's somewhere else I can go in the organization, or I'm going to start thinking about what I want to do next, talking to people, and start making that plan of what it looks like. I never tell people, be like, you know, I've been in a few toxic work environments and I've had friends say, well, you should have just quit. And I'm like, that's easier said than done for all kinds of reasons. So it's all about crafting your exit strategy.
Beautiful. And guys, this is really, really good frameworks for all of us to, you know, either help become the reason or be that person that makes people feel like they belong. You know, and this is all so important on so many different levels. But I'll tell you, I think sometimes the most misunderstood people are authors, Mita, like, because we're hearing them.
Yes.
Yeah. And like, look, I have the privilege of, you know, having gotten to know you for some time here leading up to this. And then there's this book launch, but there's people that are going to be hearing you now for the first time and then also getting to read your book. But what is one myth about yourself that people get wrong, that maybe they would take out of context after having read both of your books or maybe listening to this podcast, you think?
Let's say, okay, maybe after you read my second book, you won't believe this, that I'm not funny. You know, my brother gets the credit for being the funny person in my family because he's funny. Really funny. He's funny. He's funny. He's the life of the party. He knows everybody. And I tend to, you know, I know a lot of people too, but I value one-on-one relationships. I value one-on-one time versus like, you know, group settings. I'm socially selective, but I'm pretty funny. And I think that comes out in the second book. And one of my aunts said to me, you know, you're really funny. She read the first book and she said, you're really funny. And I hope you tell some funny stories in the second book, which I think I've accomplished.
You have. Yes. I think you're funny. So yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. You're there. So I ask guests this, and it's either one of two questions, but I actually want to ask you both.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
I feel, and there's no right or wrong answer for them, but you know, over the course of my podcast with people who have real deep, the guests that is, have very deep, meaningful, anchored senses of purpose. And you clearly have one. I mean, it's been a driving force for both of these books. It's a driving force I could see now that's even more further cemented just based on your personal story and how you grew up. But, you know, when we all inevitably pass, which we will, like whoever's at our funeral, whether it's, you know, all the great grandkids or grandkids or other children, what have you, if there is a word while you're on this mission, Mita, that you want everybody in the world to remember you by? One word you'd say when it all is done and finished and your
Hmm.
work here is finished. If there's one word that comes to mind that you want to say, everyone would remember, like, that's Mita. This is her.
Hmm.
Like, I would describe her
Wow.
in this one word. What would that word be?
I'm gravitating towards courage. I hope
Brave.
so, especially with what's happening in our world today. I want my children to know I tried to do what I could. People come to me and ask me all kinds of things about what's happening, and it's like we don't write executive orders. We don't have the power to start and end wars like average people like me. But what am I doing, and what do I have the courage to do in my home, in my community, and workplace?
All right, it's a great word. Brave, definitely. And I think, you know, considering all the things that you've shared with us today about how you grew up and, everything you endured through, which I think is the pure embodiment of LFG energy, which is all about resilience and getting up when things were dark and bleak.
Yeah.
You've done that continually. So brave is definitely, or courage is a word that I would absolutely use too. So that's a great one. I like it. And last question, what does LFG energy mean to you? Again, no right or wrong answer, but what does that energy mean to you? Because I find, having gotten to know you, a lot of parallels and synergies between you and your mission and your work and craft and what I feel LFG energy is. But what does it
Yeah.
mean to you?
In this season of my life, unapologetic.
Love it. Love it.
Unapologetic, right?
Yep. Do so unapologetically. That's a really good way.
Yes. I
Yeah.
love that. What good questions.
Oh,
Wow. Really good.
well, thanks. Well, they're personal, right? And that's why I say
Really
there's no
good.
right or wrong one. But I don't ask them of everyone. Sometimes it's just one or the other. But the one
Oh,
about the one word at the end of your life really only ties to people that I know are like on really deep, meaningful
yeah.
missions.
Woof.
Because
That's
there's a
good.
sense of purpose there. And my definition of like ending up a good human is knowing what that word is in your life, whatever that is, have it
Yeah.
really etched into your heart and into your mind. And every day you try and take some type of step towards that word. No matter how much time you have left on this earth, as long as you're moving towards that word, then you're a good human, right? Because that word meant something to you. You wanted to make sure that you were in
Yes.
alignment with that word so that when you do get to the end, you've done everything you can to make sure you're remembered by that one word. So I think,
That's amazing. I'm going to use those questions and give you credit next time.
okay.
That's amazing. Love
Right.
that.
Well, I'm glad you do, and that means a lot. That's incredible praise coming from you. But listen, I salute the mission, um, in reading the book, but also in getting to talk with you, especially just even going through the show. There's a lot of things that I take stock in, and I feel good about that I'm on the right pathway, but also ways in which I can improve the pathway I'm on to make everything around me and all the things that I touch and that I'm involved in better and lift other people up and see them and just apply the same level of dignity, the application of dignity to them that I would want applied back to
Yes.
me. So thank you for that so much, Meeta. I really appreciate it. I know everyone who's listened to this is going to have the same takeaways. And we wish you all the success with the book launch. Members of my community are getting this book here in the coming
Thank
weeks,
you
which
so
I'm
much.
really, really excited about. The LFG Society. So yeah, people will see you and they'll find you, I'm sure, on the podcast
Oh,
tour and
thank you
on
so much.
other shows and things. And I encourage them to connect with you and get to learn more. But thank you for what you're doing, Mita. I really appreciate it. I know your dad is incredibly proud of you too,
Oh, thank you. That
um,
means a lot.
and your whole family as well. But you deserve all of it.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks so much.
Anytime, Mita. Thanks for being on the show.